Hello everybody and welcome to the Higher History Paper 2 How Fully Explain revision video. In this section of the revision videos we're going to have a little look at the How Fully Explain question. We'll talk about the breakdown of the marks and then we'll have a little look further at the question by doing an example answer. So the question is worth 10 marks, so you should dedicate yourself approximately 25 minutes for this question. The good news is you will get one How Fully Explained question in the final exam. Obviously the big surprise is what issue the How Fully question will be on. So this type of question is designed for you to take points from the source. So you'll have one source dedicated to the How Fully Explained question, and then you should use your own knowledge and omission points to explain what is missing from the source. Now, for those of you that have done National 5 history, this structure, it will be quite familiar to you. So you should still have things like your judgment sentence, your source points, and then of course your omission points. The major difference, of course, is your omission points will be in much more detail and in depth than they were at National 5. So in terms of your structure, it's very important that you start with your judgment sentence. And for those of you that are not quite sure what that means, basically it's kind of an overall statement where you basically just reword the question. So you take the phrase of the question and you put it and you reword it. You have up to 4 marks available for source points. However, we recommend you take 3 points from the source. And of course, you don't just quote from the source. You have to quote and also put it into your own words. And then finally, you have up to 7 marks for any knowledge points. And with you taking 3 points from the source, that means that you should write 7 omission points to complete the 10 marks. And the good thing is, because of the amount of knowledge points that we give you, you should hopefully have plenty available for you. If you don't have a judgment sentence, which will never happen, you will all write your judgment sentence, you will only be awarded 2 marks. So it's very important that perhaps at the end of your paper, if you've got time, check your How Fully Explain, make sure you have your judgment sentence. If you did forget it, you can put a little star at the start of your answer and put it at the bottom of your answer at the end of your paper and mark very clearly that that is your judgment sentence for the How Fully Explain. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a wee look at an example answer. I'm going to write part of the answer, so I'll do the judgment sentence. I'm only going to do 1 point from the source just to show you what that would look like, and then I'm only going to do 1 knowledge point. So it's just a little snippet of sections of the answer, and then I will show you an entire How Fully Explain example answer. So here is our source. So it's source D, and the question says, how fully does source D explain the effects of migration in the empire from 1939, and it's worth 10 marks. And you'll notice that I've already highlighted in the source the 4 possible source points. So as I mentioned to you, you have up to 4 marks of source points. However, we would recommend that you only take 3 and you use that remaining part of your answer for your omission points. So just like you've done in the past when you're at National 5, for your How Fully Explain, you start with your judgment sentence. So although the judgment sentence itself doesn't get any marks, it's really, really important that you have that so that you can get access to the rest of the marks. So very simply, you start, there we go. You start by rewording the question. So we say, overall, source D partly explains, explains, and then I'm going to reword the topic in the question. So after where it says how fully does source D explain, that entire sentence in the question I'm just going to copy, and that never changes. So you do that for every single How Fully Explain question. from Scotland to 1939. Now you'll notice that I've highlighted in bold the phrase partly explained. So it's really important that you write that phrase for every how fully explained that you do to indicate to the marker that you are aware that the source does not fully illustrate, it doesn't tell you everything. That's the whole point of a how fully explain. You need to identify things in the source that answer the question, and then of course you want to then look at things it doesn't include, which will come from your own knowledge. So as you can see, I've highlighted points in the source that focuses on the impact that migration empire had on Scotland. So the green one kind of focusing on the development of the canal system thanks to the Irish, and then looking at the development of the Forth Rail Bridge, which obviously helped to improve transport links for Scottish people. And then of course we've got the development of cities in like Glasgow, and then looking at the subway system in Glasgow being developed as well. So I'm going to take the sentence that focuses on the canal system. So for every how fully explain, once you've done your judgment sentence, you can just dive straight into the source points. So in this case, I'm going to say source D states, and then I copy the sentence word for word, full stop to full stop. I do not summarize it, I do not change the wording, I write it exactly as the source says. So one of the major projects which required the tenacity and muscle power of the Glasgow Irish. Now if I was to stop there, I wouldn't get the mark. What I need to do now is I now need to put that sentence alone in my own words. I don't need to bring any new information, I just need to put it in my own words. So I would say something like, this shows, I'll underline this actually, this shows the effects of migration and empire on Scotland as the labour, let's say the labour contribution of the Irish made a positive impact on the Scottish economy by helping to develop canals. Pardon me. And then that would get 1 mark. So I quoted from the source, and then I have put it into my own words, so showing the marker very clearly that I understand the context, the meaning of that source point. And remember, as I mentioned, if you've watched the Evaluate This video, it's not, the SQ is not looking for you to change every single word or to put every single word into your own words. There are some words that you cannot do that with. So it's really important that you try and summarise it in your own words as much as you can without losing the meaning of the actual sentence from the source. So I'm not going to do the other 2 source points, I just want to show you kind of snippets of each section. So obviously in the exam, you would of course do another 2 source points. You're not going to do what I do right now, which is go straight on to omission. I'm just doing this to kind of show you a little bit as to what you should be doing. So after, if we imagine that there is 2 source points there, you would then go on to your omission. So again, if you've watched the Explain the Reasons revision video, in terms of the omission points, I think it's really important that you reference back to the question, make a point, and then explain it in detail, kind of following that QPE structure format that I've mentioned quite a lot in the videos. So here we go. I think it's really good when you start your omission points just to indicate to the reader that you are coming on to omission by using the word however. So you say, however, the source fails to mention. And at this point, I would be making a point that I want to develop further. And I think what's really good about the How Fully Explain is because there's 7 omission points available for you, you have a real chance to kind of show off your knowledge. So let's go for let's go for a point on jute. The empire, the empire provided raw materials for Scottish factories such as jute. So that's my point, and I've kind of referenced back to the question by talking about, what the empire was able to provide for Scotland. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain in detail what impact this had on Scotland. So I'm going to say this shows the effects of migration and empire on Scotland as the jute trade was closely linked would be good, with the empire, as the raw material came from Bengal, India. So I think it's important to remember that with issue 4, which this question is on, you want to really focus on taking examples from mostly issue 3 and issue 2, and explaining the impact that had on Scotland. So in this case, I've taken a kind of issue 3 example talking about jute coming from Bengal, India, and then obviously being exported all over the world. And that impact, of course, for Scotland is huge, as it helps build the economy. It means that Dundee textile firms, they become internationally known. It means that the Scottish kind of business influence is growing across the world. So that's the impact. So the example isn't necessarily anything new in terms of, a new topic. You're basically just taking your examples from mostly issue 2 and issue 3, and then you're explaining that impact that it had on Scottish people. So that is our knowledge point, my very first knowledge point. And like I've said, I've made a point which is focusing on jute, and then I've explained how the jute trade, obviously that kind of very close association with Bengal, had an impact, a very positive impact on Scottish businesses, especially in Dundee. So that obviously kind of gives you a little snippet of what this question, or answer I should say, looks like. So let's have a little closer look at the full example answer, just to kind of show you what this would look like. So it's still the exact same question, issue 4, focusing on the effects of migration and empire. And as you can see, we've got our judgment sentence at the top there at the very, very start. So that's great. The marker now knows already that I can access more of the marks. And then as you can see, I've got my 3 source points, and every one of them I have interpreted in my own words. After my 3 source points, for this example answer, I've taken 4 just to kind of show you what that 4th source point looks like, but you do not need to do that. You would only need to do 3. If you've got time, you could do 4 if you really wanted to, but don't feel like you have to. 3 is good. And then we're on to our 7 omission points. And again, just following that very simple structure of referencing back to the question, making that point, and then the bits that are highlighted in bold are my explanations. And because obviously we give you so many knowledge points, this should hopefully be an absolute gift of a question. And it should be something that you, in terms of your knowledge points, if you do your revision, you should have plenty of things to speak about in this type of question. So if you do have any other further questions or queries that you would like to talk about when it comes to how fully explained, please feel free to speak to your history teachers, and we'd be more than happy to help. Hello everybody, and welcome to the final video in your higher history revision videos, which is on the 2 source question. So in this part of the video, we are going to look at the 2 source question, which will be in paper 2, and talk about the breakdown of the marks, and then have a look at an example answer. So this question is the only question in your source paper that will have 2 sources. The evaluate the usefulness and how fully explain will have 1 source each. This one has 2. It's worth 10 marks, so just like the how fully explain, you should dedicate approximately 25 minutes to this question. You'll only get one two-source question in the paper, and the idea of this question is to kind of examine different views shown in two very different sources about a single topic. Now, for a number of you, you may have done National 5 history, and you may remember a compared the views question which had two sources. This question, the two-source question, is absolutely nothing like a compare the views. It is not a compare the views. You do not ever compare the two sources in your answer. The best way to think of a two-source question is like doing two how fully explain answers in one answer. So, in terms of the marking, the SQA gives you 6 marks for the sources and 6 marks, up to 6 marks for the sources, up to 6 marks for the omission points. Now, there's multiple ways that you can kind of answer this question. Probably the most popular way is to dedicate 3 source points to each source. So you do a kind of overall sentence, that's 1 mark, and then you do 2 source points from the source with interpretation. And then you look at the other source and you do the exact same thing. You do a kind of overall sentence and then 2 points from the source that answers the question with your interpretation. And once you've done that, you can then obviously do 4 omission points to make it 10 out of 10. If you do have time, you could do 6 omission points, so that you kind of got that safety net there. But remember, you would only be marked out of 10, so you can do the 6 source points and then 4 omission points. The other way that you could do it is if you feel like you don't want to try the overall sentences for each source, you could forget about them. Do 2 source points with interpretation for 1 source. Then repeat that, do 2 source points with interpretation for another source, and then do 6 omission points. Now, that option, I think, is very good if you feel really confident with your omission points and maybe you're kind of struggling to put, trying to kind of identify an overall sentence for each source. So that can be a very good way as well to access the 10 out of 10 for this question. So let's have a wee look at an example answer. So this is what your two-source question will look like. So you'll have 2 sources in the paper. So in this case, the two-source question is focusing on source B and source C. And this question is asking us how much do sources B and C reveal about differing interpretations of the impact of Scottish immigrants on Canada. So in this case, we want to focus on Canada, so we're focusing on issue 3, but we can look at all different themes. We can focus on the cultural impact on Canada, we can focus on the economic impact of Canada, we can focus on the political impact of Canada. As long as it's on Canada, you can look at any of the themes that your history teacher will have taught you. So, as I mentioned, you have up to 6 marks for the sources, up to. So I've highlighted 3 source points from each source. Now, I'm not going to necessarily write all of those source points. I'm going to take 2 from source B and 2 from source C, because of course I have my overall sentence. Now, what's really important to note here is obviously these sentences, they don't match. I'm not comparing the 2 sources. I'm really very much treating them independently. So if we scroll down to have a wee look at our example answer, you'll see that I start with an overall sentence. So in this case, I'm trying to kind of summarise what the view is of the source. What is it telling me? So for source B, I say overall, source B highlights the positive impact that the Scots had on the Canadian economy as they helped develop financial services. So the first source was very much all about the kind of economic impact of Scots. So I get 1 mark for summarising the viewpoint of that source. Now, let's say I didn't feel very confident about what the source's view was. I could miss out that overall point and just go straight into source B states. I can absolutely do that. If I did do that and I decided to miss out my overall point, I need to make sure that I do 6 omission points. However, we've got the overall point here, so that's fine. So I then go on to my 2 source points. I say source B states, and I take a sentence from source B. You'll notice that I've not done any sort of comparison with source C. It is very much like the first bit of a how fully explain. I've got an overall point. It's not like a judgment sentence where I'm just having to reword the question. I've got to summarise what that source is telling me, what's it talking about. And then I've got 2 source points with clear interpretation. So once I've dealt with source B, or whatever the source is, whether it's source A, B, C, D, etc., I then deal with the other source. So at this point, I'm not going to write any omission. The reason for that is it's better to deal with the sources first so that you know what's included in the sources, and then go on to your knowledge points so that you know, okay, I can't talk about the Bank of Toronto as my example because I mentioned that in my source points. Or I can't talk about the kind of profitable lumber business because that was in source B. So it's really important that you do your omission points after you've dealt with both sources. So just like I did with source B, I then look at an overall statement for source C. So I structure it the exact same. I say overall source C highlights the more kind of negative impact and experiences of many Scots as many English and Gaelic speakers found it difficult to integrate into society. So I'm summarising that kind of overall view of the source. And then just as I did for source B, I take a point from the source and I provide interpretation. I put it into my own words once I've copied the sentence from the source. So at this point, I would have 6 out of 10, in my answer. So I've got 3 source points from source B, and then I've got 3 source points from source C. Now, let's say I decided that the overall points were not quite for me. What I can do is take out both overall points, the overall point for source B, the overall point for source C, and just do the 2 source points, 2 from source B and 2 from source C. That's absolutely fine, as again, you just need to do 6 omission points if you're going to do 4 points from the source. And then in this case, because I've done 6 source points, all I need is 4 omission points to bring the 10 out of 10 marks. So like I said before, this is obviously focusing on Canada. Now, because it's focusing on a single country, it means that I am able to talk about any theme. So in my first omission point, I've talked about the impact of Scots in politics. The second one looks at the improvements we made in transport and infrastructure, and also education, and then finally culture. Now, as you can see, it's very important that you include the examples that we've been looking at. So talking about the Canadian Pacific Railway, talk about our role in creating schools and universities to help develop the Canadian economy and their culture. So it's really important that you do use your examples in your answer. So that brings us to an end of our video for the 2 source question. If you do have any further questions or queries, please do not hesitate to come and speak to us. We are more than happy to help.